Hello, welcome to the IERLab Podcast. Who is IERLab? IERLab is the Influencer Ethnography Research Lab located in Perth, Western Australia. What do? We specialise in the methodologies and the pedagogies of influencer research. I'm your host Walter Lee, coming to you all the way from South Korea to bring you, our listeners, a more in-depth look on what's going on in the world of influencer cultures. Our series will feature researchers, scholars, and students on influencer culture. Now, today we will be focusing on the Oegugin influencer ecology in South Korea. Now, Oegugin is the word for foreigner in Korean, and also touch upon the LGBTQ+ influencers also in South Korea. I'm really looking forward to this topic today, as a while ago I was seen as a Oegugin or Gyopo influencer, Gyopo meaning overseas Korean. Not so much now, I've left that field for the time being. But the best person to talk about this subject is today's guest, who is a media sociologist and research fellow in the Internet Studies at Curtin University. Now, she has published over 20 articles and book chapters on various areas of media pop cultures, in particular on influencer cultures and online dating in the Asia-Pacific region and also the US. Now, during her time at Korea University, one of the top universities here in South Korea, she won the Top Honor Student Award and Fellowship and has won the Career Development Award Graduate and Professional Student Council SIUC 5 years in a row from 2015. Now, she hails from the country that I'm living in, South Korea, and she's living in the country I grew up in, Australia. So basically, we have swapped countries. So welcome to the show, Jin.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you very much for joining us today. This is the second episode, and I am really looking forward to today's topic. But first, I want to start off by asking you about the reasons why you wanted to work on topics such as Oegugin influences. As I mentioned earlier to our listeners, Oegugin is the Korean word for foreigner, so foreigner influences in Korea, as well as the LGBTQ+ influences also based here in Korea.
So I guess my whole research journey is about me, my research, like something that I like about, or something that I am always questioned about, or something that I don't really like about. So as a person who grew up in Korea, I always encounter this weird, strange attitude of Korean people that people, they are so obsessed with this idea of nationalism, they always want to differentiate themselves from, similar East Asians, like a Chinese or Japanese, but also they are somehow, but strangely, very positive, and very favor towards white people. But that same attitude is not really easily seen when they encounter those people with color. So I find it very fascinating about this strange attitudes towards different people who are always considered just the foreigners. So that's one of the reasons that I kind of very interested in this idea of nationalism and racism in Korea. And when I went to the US for my PhD project, for my PhD degree, there was one particular YouTube that became really, really popular, which is Korean Englishman. This channel shows that these two white British men who just eat or introduce Korean food to their, British people. And these contents are usually complimenting Korean food or endorsing Korean, things. And then there are a whole bunch of, comments written in Korea, this is the taste of Korea. And I find it very, very weird, why Korean people try to have a kind of sense of self-validation from watching these, white people trying Korean food. So that led me to this project about Oegugin or foreigner influencers who endorse this kind of Korean content or Korean culture and then brand themselves with this idea of Korea, but not necessarily looking into the deep inside of Korea. So that's one of the reasons that I became kind of interested in this project. And the other one, LGBTQ plus influences, Korea is a kind of very conservative country. And when I grew up, there was this phenomena, which is still popular, is this BL culture, like, shipping or making imaginary homoerotic relationships between like a male characters in from cartoon or animation, or, like in the real life, like a K-pop idols. So I grew up with this kind of, like a content. And then later I started to study about, this cultural studies, and realize that there are some of, differences between what I imagine to be queer and then the actual queer people. So this discrepancy was often cited in these YouTube channels run by these Korean queer people. So that's how I started to look into this kind of, like this project.
I think it's really interesting. From a person who, though Korean born, all my life I grew up in Australia, and especially in the 90s and early 2000s, it was still sort of, even in Australia, frowned upon to be gay or like or lesbian or something, and we would often make jokes about them. But yes, as you mentioned, Korea is still sort of this very conservative country, even today. But what I noticed that in Korea is that men are actually a lot more physically not attractive. What's the word I'm looking for? They like touch people, like other males, in what could be considered a homoerotic way, but they don't see it that way, which is quite interesting. And I thought it was kind of like a reverse from Australia, where like if I were to hold my male friend's hand in Australia, they'd be like, "What are you doing?" But
Right.
in Korea, it's sort of normal. It's also sort of normal to lay on your male friend's shoulder or female friend's shoulder. Females as well hold hands quite often through the streets, even though they're not in a relationship. It's quite interesting how even though Korea is so, I guess, conservative, they have these sort of kind of gay, lesbian, LGBTQ plus influences still in them without them knowing. And also the element of cross-dressing on TV as well. Like you will see a lot of like celebrities, big name celebrities wearing women's outfits or vice versa. And it doesn't really seem to faze the public. But when you actually talk about the deeper meaning of LGBTQ plus, a lot of Koreans tend to skip over that. I would like to talk about the phenomenon that is the Oegugin influences, the foreign influences. Now, I would like to focus on a specific area that interests me in a piece that was written by yourself and Professor Crystal, where you wrote, "We found the videos shared on these platforms are frequently only of white passing Oegugins." So continuing with, there is a subgenre of Oegugin reaction videos catering to domestic audiences, like you mentioned before, but the preference is for white beauty. Now, this is something I have also noticed, and you did actually cite it in one of your papers, that there's a TV show called 한국인 처음 있지, which is Welcome, It's Your First Time in Korea. Now, I don't watch it, but whenever it comes up on TV, about 90% of the time is either a white male or a white female as the subject, or groups of them, right? Now, after some research, according to Statista, the distribution of visitors' arrivals in South Korea in 2022 by region of origin. Now, the Asian race made up 62.04% of that population, followed by Americans by 20.88%. That basically shows that the Asian market is dominant in the area that is interested in Korea. This could also be possibly due to geographical reasons, of course, as well. But why do you think there is a reason behind this fascination for predominantly white or foreign influences in Korea, and specifically, I guess, white foreigners?
I guess there are two important factors. The first one is just obsession with white beauty. So, like, Korea is one of the countries that is heavily influenced by, American culture, like Hollywood movies and Hollywood films. And then we have this idea of white beauty as the ideal or social normativity. So just watching or showcasing white people who have, like some level of physical, appearance, like, in the socially desirable manner, that can have entertainment value itself, like just showcasing beautiful or maybe like a well-toned white man who just wander in Korea and then who become fascinated by the Korean culture. That gives a pleasure to Korean audiences who have this idea of white beauty. That's one thing. And the second thing is probably in relation to nationalism and also the post-colonial history, the colonial history of Korea. Like the Korea always seek to have a sense of self-validation from like those who are considered upper than Koreans. So for example, like it's related to the history of Korea. The Korea was colonized by Japan, and then it literally like saved by the America, like in the 1950s. Then from that, the Korean culture and society become quite fascinated about American culture, who appears to be very superior than any other countries and any other cultures. So they believe that they had this idea that if we imitate American culture, then we can achieve maybe like a second level, or next we can be located next to American culture, but still higher than other other countries or cultures of color, like Asian cultures or African culture. So that racism in Korea has a structure in that way. Like Korean people don't necessarily consider themselves yellow or Asian, but probably they think they are next to American culture, which is white. And just showing American or white people who appear to be very like fascinated about Korean culture, just by watching these kind of things, they seek a sense of self-validation that their culture is now recognized by white people, and then they can assure themselves in terms of the internal racism that they have.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, especially like it's a little bit off topic, but obviously Korea is also very well known for plastic surgery, and there is a certain look that many people who go in for plastic surgery want to achieve. And when you look at it, it is like predominantly like towards the Western side of a look, maybe bigger eyes or like a more chiseled chin or like a higher nose compared to obviously Korean standards of like a lower nose and smaller eyes. But I think as well, just by seeing the K wave, it might people are taking a lot of interest in Korea these days, and that is probably going to boost the influencer culture here as well for Koreans, which I'm really looking forward to. And I'm sure that's something that you will be interested in as well, seeing how the K-wave affects Korean influencers, because these days as well, a lot of Korean influencers are uploading English subtitles through Korean content. So though they may be looking towards the white, back in the day, the white style of beauty, maybe, and I hope it will change, and Koreans can be a bit more proud of the way they look, because we Koreans are beautiful people. So
well, I wanted to just add a bit about the Korean culture and the K-beauty thing, because that's not really related to the influence and the Oegugin influence that we are talking about. The K-beauty is a bit different, because in many Western countries have this idea that Koreans want to achieve the white look or want to become white people, and then they address this as a reason of why the plastic surgery is very popular in Korea. But in Korea, the plastic surgery thing is a bit more complicated, because it's not necessarily about wanting to become white people. Like the beauty of the beauty norm is quite different than in Korea. That is quite different than those in America or in Western countries. It's more like like becoming a person who looks similar to others. Like, the Korea is a very homogeneous country. So if you don't have an eyelid, for example, like, double eyelid, which appears that everybody has nowadays.
Mhm.
So it looks like they don't belong to this category, or, it's like, everybody does that and then I will just do it. So that's more like, like a obsession or a culture of homogeneity, also in relation to like classism as well, that
Ah.
that is distinguished by, or that is ascertained by a look. So for example, when you look at person and then if this person appears to be decent, and then they just automatically consider, oh, this person must be, like high class or something. But if you don't have, that kind of physical appearance, then just people assume that this person must be a low class, and then that can be, ignorable. So that's one of the reasons why that the K-beauty or plastic surgery industry become very popular in Korea. Yeah, so I just wanted to, address that.
No, that's absolutely excellent. Thank you for addressing that and confirming that with me. That has definitely cleared things out, and now I completely understand. But back to the influencer culture. Like, I have also worked with Korean influencers who purposely use white foreign influencers to help boost viewership on their channels. And granted, it actually does work, as I've seen from like the people around me. But also in workplaces where advertising foreign is more appealing than just advertising Koreans. You see it a lot with English academies. Now, which brings me sort of to my next question, that you mentioned that government agencies are quick to use foreign influencers to promote Korea, yet some of the influencers noted that so in your studies that there is less opportunities for creativity when it comes to content under the eyes of the government. Just from your research, can you briefly explain some positives and negatives for foreign influencers to work with the Korean government?
Sure. So for the positive thing, the foreigners now have better opportunities to work and then actually make money from, just creating content based on their experiences. So, in many countries, foreigners who don't have a citizenship of the country that they are living, they have very restricted rules about, what kind of occupation they can do, or how many hours they can work for, just work as part of their occupation, which is stipulated their visa status. But the content creator industry is more flexible and it's not necessarily considered a proper job, unfortunately. So just by posting that, the content about their lives in Korea, whether it is sponsored by the Korean government or the companies or just for themselves, that gives an opportunity for them to make money and then possibly, make a living based on the revenues that they accumulate from the content. That's one thing that is considered positive. But the other side is when you work with the Korean government, especially, like they have this very restrictive rules about, just to show that just asking for people to show this positive aspect of Korea. Of course, from the perspective of Korean government, it's always, they always want to show something positive rather than negative to promote the country and then promote the tourism, of course. But still, it ultimately can lead to the very stereotypical image or very limited understanding of Korea. Like, let's say the K-pop, for example, is popular, and then the government understanding of, promoting Korean culture is, just something, branding something with the K-pop. And then that's, that's the easiest way to, draw people's attention, because nowadays people just obsessed with the K-pop, right? But if you just highlight that kind of content, then what is the agency of the, or freedom of the content creators who want to address or who want to highlight different aspects of the Korean culture? Like, for example, let's say Chinese foreigners who live in Korea, like, they are easily understood or seen as Koreans because of the looks, but their experiences might be very, very different compared to other people who have distinctive, non-Korean look, right? Then their content may shed light on much different aspects about Korean cultures, maybe in relation to the Chinese culture and etc. But if Korean government want the Korean content creators, the Oegugin content creators, to talk about just the K-pop or other things that are already highlighted in other content, then like all of these diversities, all of this diversity and very colorful angles of Korean culture is just diminished. Like, so that's kind of bad things about how the Korean government try to just collaborate with the content creators to boost the tourism, and then like not really thinking about the other aspects of the Korean cultures.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think all countries, if they were going to use influencers, they obviously just want to show the good side or the most popular side of that country rather than being a little bit critical or, some things that you might have to encounter. They want to paint, and I understand their country as perfect. But yes, it does leave a lot of doesn't leave a lot of leeway for being quite creative or being truthful. Sometimes it does seem a little fake in many ways. But I kind of want to now move on to another fascinating subject, onto the area that you're working with, and that is the LGBTQ plus influences in South Korea. Now, for people who aren't aware, and I will remind everyone who's listening that Korea is still very conservative when it comes to the promotion of LGBTQ plus communities. Though we have been seeing a presence of more LGBTQ plus TV celebrities or influencers on Korean media, there is still a stigma attached to coming out. So you don't really hear people coming out as gay, or it's still like a more of a rumor mill. Now, this is heavily linked to, I believe, and you can probably correct me or give some more, I guess, of your knowledge, that this comes out of being brought up in under a very heavy Christian society. I mean, there's also Buddhism as well, but I think Christians make up a larger percent of the religious values here in Korea. Now, the times are changing to Statistics Korea, when in 2015 we found out that more than 55% of Koreans are choosing not to follow a religion. I was fascinated to read one of your papers, which was the ways that many LGBTQ plus couples released their content, which was in the form of live streaming. Now, as a person who doesn't watch live streaming, it made sense that I didn't see it. But can you explain to our listeners why this seems to be a more effective way for LGBTQ plus couples to spread this sort of influence on their viewers?
Sure. Although the religion aspect is not really significant in Korean society, but those who are associated with Christianity has more vocal power in demanding something to the government. Usually, they have this strong relationships with the politicians, some pastors in very very big churches, and then they have this homophobia, and then whenever there is a public discussions about LGBTQ plus social human rights, and then they become very very vocal, and then just to occupy the whole debate and discussion table, and then asking for the government not to do anything. And within this context, when a company tried to collaborate with social media influencers who have a sexual minority, who have non-normative sexuality, then they will likely face a criticisms from the public. So this criticism is not really based on amount of people who have homophobia, but it's just more about the intensity. So for example, according to the recent statistics, young generations in Korea don't really have any stigmatizations about LGBTQ plus people. They are more queer friendly, but they are young people, and then those who have a power are older people, and then they are very, very vocal, and then they have this strong power to, decide whether a company or whether a government can what they can do. So in this context, a lot of LGBTQ plus influencers try to make a living by, by making content and then making interactions with the audience. However, their way of making revenue is quite limited, as opposed to those who have non-normative sexuality, like, those the content creators or influencers with non-normative sexuality. So for example, let's say you are a content creator who make YouTube content with your relationships with your boyfriend as a woman, then probably you will get a lot of sponsorship deals from a lot of companies, from beauty products or maybe like furniture or etc. But if you're a queer couple, then you showcase and your content is to showcase your relationship with your person with the same sex, then probably your chances to have a sponsorship deals is very, very limited, because that homophobia is very vocal, and then the government don't want to risk themselves from just doing that kind of collaborations. So from my interviews with LGBTQ plus influencers, that just do live streaming is an easy way for them to make money, because people sometimes donate monies by just watching live streaming, and then that can be a pocket money for them, maybe not really big compared to the monies that they can make from the sponsorship deals with the companies, but still, that's the kind of alternatives, that they can do with their sexual, with their identity as a non-normative, people, as an influencers.
That's really fascinating. I'd never thought about it in that way. And yes, I know that live streaming, you're able to get like what they call like donations or anything. I actually have one more question for you. And that is, where would you like to see progress made in regards to both Oegugin influences in Korea as well as the LGBTQ plus influences? And does there need to be cooperation from both sides, example, the government, the public, or whatever, in order to create a healthy relationship for these currently niche genres to flourish?
Well, that's a very big question and also important question, but I don't know how to answer properly. So just simply because there are so many areas to work on. So for example, I guess for the Oegugin influences, I think the government or the companies need to have a better understanding of diversity, racial diversity. I know they have this tendency of hiring white people or working with white people just because, from their understanding, white people appear more attractive compared to those like those who look like the same with the Koreans, like, East Asians, or who appear to have less attractive aspects compared to the white people. But still, it's very unfortunate that the government and the industry works in that way, in a very racist way. So I think it's really, really important to think about how to raise this racial awareness among not just the public, but also the person who make decisions, like the government or the industry who often collaborate with these Oegugin influences. So if they have better understandings about how to promote racial diversity when they work with the Oegugin influencers, that might actually lead to enhancing better understandings about the Korean culture that is not really xenophobic or homogeneous, but is more open to racial diversity. That's one thing. Secondly, for the Oegugin influencers, I think it's very easy to just, as a content creator, maybe it's very easy to just chime in the popular topic like a K-pop or, like K-food or K-beauty, rather than just going into the deep understandings about Korea, because they also need to be aware of their views and their engagement with the audience. Of course, that's the situation that we are living as a social media users, but still, I think it's also important to have some better understandings about the Korean cultures, or maybe some awareness about how their content creator, how their content can work as the knowledge brokers between those people in the Korea and then those their audiences in other countries. So they also need to think about some social responsibility as well, like they distribute their content, thinking about how this content will affect other people's understanding of Korean culture or other countries, because like a lot of people consider social media influencers as very important points to know about different cultures and countries. So that's, I guess, the responsibility or awareness that is required for the content creators who brand themselves with the Korean culture. For the LGBTQ plus influences, I don't know. Wow, that's a big thing, because the stigmatization or homophobia is very strong in Korea. Although a lot of young generation don't have that, and then they are very open to queer people and then queer culture. But the society itself is very conservative, and it's very unfortunate to think about when we think about that the K-pop is really K-pop oftentimes brand themselves with this queer identity or queer culture when they go to other countries and then when they perform in overseas. But when they come to Korea, like they suddenly become very like a homophobia, and then like they try to avoid with any relationship with these queer images or queer like they don't publicly support queer things in Korea, but they do that when they go outside Korea. So I guess that's how that the industry tried to regulate or maybe discipline the K-pop idols, but also wanted to make money by branding themselves with this diversity or cultural awareness that is prevalent in Western countries. So I think in the companies and the societies also need to think about, this kind of, discrepancy as well, and then think about how they will enhance this awareness or, queer awareness about the Korea when they work with the influencers or when they brand themselves with this queer culture. Yeah.
That's you said you didn't have an answer, but that was a fantastic answer, actually. I think it was very detailed, and it's definitely going to hopefully raise more awareness out there for people who are unfamiliar with this situation. But we'll have to wrap it up there. But is there anything that you would like to promote, maybe any in regards to your current research or something that you would like to talk about for our listeners out there?
Alongside of this project about LGBTQ plus influencers and Oegugin influencers, I'm also working on the pet influencer industry as well. So I hope to highlight how the cuteness of animals is commodified in Korea as a kind of next idol in Korea, but also how it has a potential of a politics as animal activism, but also it has a lot of limitations and ugly side of commodifying animals.
Yeah, animals, especially pets. There's been laws, I think, this year passed where like the rights of animals has increased, which is great. And what I found interesting as well is my mother, who's Australian, she came to Korea not too long ago, and she was fascinated with the fact that Koreans love to dress up and carry their dogs everywhere. And I was like thinking, is this not in Australia? And she was like, she barely sees it. So I think it's very fascinating. And we'll definitely have you on the podcast again to talk about that. But that's where we'll have to wrap it up for today. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Today's episode as well was by IERLab Podcast. Once again, thank you to today's guest, Jin.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really nice to talk with you.
Yeah, I love today's talk. And until next time, this has been Walter Lee. You may click on your next adventure now.